G'day, I'm Josh Szeps. I'm a broadcaster at ABC Radio Sydney and the host of the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast. It's a great honour to be speaking with Liz McCusker, who helped develop the Huntington's disease statewide service and is about to retire from her position at the neurology department at Westmead Hospital. Liz, thanks for being here.
Pleasure, and hello to everybody I may know out there.
So it was 28 years ago almost, in 1993, that the genetic abnormality for Huntington's was announced. What did you think at the time? Did you think there'd be a cure soon?
There was incredible jubilation actually, and I remember Professor Ed Chu in Melbourne, who was one of the first people to really take a big interest in Huntington disease, a psychiatrist. And Robin Capp at the association telephoned. We were absolutely over the moon. We just really thought this would take off. And at the first conference I went to after that, people were standing up and saying, 5 years this will be cured. And we're still on the cusp.
If you could say anything to yourself back then, almost 28 years ago, about where we are now, what would it be?
Well, I think we're really, this time I actually think we're on the true last climb.
What gives you that hope?
Well, I think the thing now is that the therapies that are out there, the genetic therapies, are actually directed at the baseline cause, which is this curious extra bit of a gene that we all carry. So it's like a stutter in the gene. We all carry this Huntington gene, but people who develop Huntington disease inherit extra bits.
How did you get into this specialty?
Well, serendipity, like everything in my life, really. My husband, who's also a neurologist, and I did a lot of our training in Rochester in upstate New York at the University of Rochester, and Professor Ira Schulson was a neurologist there who was really a cutting-edge person who felt he could move things forward, and he took a particular interest. He was a tremendous influence on my decisions to continue, actually.
And how did the HD statewide service come to be?
Well, it's been quite a journey. Initially, the association lobbied for a particular ward at Lidcombe Hospital, way out in one of the old wards, and it was obvious that these were not going to be good enough into the future, and so a decision was made at Lidcombe Hospital to close that facility, and it seemed like an absolute calamity at the time. But with the association's support and various leverage, we were eventually able to make a move from there. But I saw that as an opportunity to develop more than just a clinic and this separate ward. A lot of people have trouble getting to a clinic or being followed up from a clinic, and so we developed, I felt that we needed to have this outreach model of care where we had our own dedicated multidisciplinary team of physios, OT, speech pathologists, dietitian, very important, obviously the nursing staff and psychologist as well as the psychiatrist, and we were able to leverage through that move that sort of a improvement, I think. And we've been able to sustain that, and it's really been a fairly unique model actually, even in Australia.
You were saying, Liz, that before genetic testing it was quite complicated to diagnose. You were just going off symptoms and it was a bit of a crapshoot. How far have we come in understanding the when and the how and the why of the disease's progression?
Well, that testing's enabled with care to and appropriate counselling has enabled genetic testing. So it means that this is a simple blood test. It has to be done very carefully, but where we used to have to do multiple tests and scans and even sometimes follow through people to post-mortem to be able to actually give a diagnosis, that blood test, if done appropriately, just gives the answer.
And presumably a lot of it was getting missed back then?
Well, it was, because we used to tell people that if they're age 60, they would not have this disease. They would not develop the disease. But my oldest patients probably in their 90s.
And when you talk about people just having this genetic blood test, if a person is pre-manifest and they're not exhibiting any symptoms, but you find out that they do have the abnormality, is there a right not to know about it?
Absolutely. But the people who are truly without any obvious appearance of the disease need to go through a quite helpful, I think, counselling process where they can talk over with someone that whether they really truly want to do this at this point in time. I think the important thing though for genetic diseases is that people actually do know of their risk, and occasionally, understandably, families are somewhat reticent about letting their kids know that this is a risk.
And so before genetic testing, presumably there were a lot of people who were symptomatic and who weren't caught, who it wasn't understood or identified, diagnosed correctly.
Yeah.
Now, is there a risk of the opposite problem in that if you do have a genetic test and you do know that you have that genetic abnormality, then you might exhibit some symptoms that are actually not symptoms of Huntington's at all.
Absolutely.
If it's something like anxiety or depression or something like that,
exactly.
Maybe it's just concurrent, maybe it's coincidental.
Exactly. And we've been involved in a major study through the Huntington Study Group, which Ira Schulson and others set up, and that was looking at that precise issue. And there are other studies as well where people are asked to consider signing up and consenting to research where we have now this perfect control group really of people who have tested negative on that test and the people that carry the genetic test but are not yet affected. And so you can follow these people through, and it went for 10 years. We're involved in it at Westmead. You can follow that through for 10 years and see the development of these symptoms. And certainly there's a whole lot of things that develop that may have probably nothing to do with the onset of Huntington's, but at the same time, those things are all a feature of Huntington's disease.
Have you had a particular research focus since you stopped being the head of the HD service?
It's one where we've got a number of international liaisons. So the major study we're doing now is Enroll HD, which is funded by a philanthropic American anonymous person.
Do you know who it is?
No, don't know. Cure Huntington's Disease Foundation Initiative, CHDI, and that's really trying to get as many people as possible with Huntington's who are part of families, may or may not be affected, different stages of the disease, and to really look in detail at how the disease develops, changes, and to have these control family people as well. And so there's now over 20,000 people in that, and so you can really get a much better idea of how the disease manifests and just the incredible variation in it actually.
And in terms of caring for people living with the disease, if the NDIS, the National Disability Scheme, can fund adequately care for these people outside of, for example, aged care homes, should we rehouse everybody outside of aged care homes into something that's more specifically tailored to their condition?
Well, I have to stress that what I say in this interview is my view and not necessarily that of the service or Western Sydney Area Health Service. I feel that NDIS in the present state doesn't have the capacity to really deliver on that. The infrastructure's not there, the trained staff may not be there, but the consistency of staff is as important as anything. And I think that rather than age-focused, it should be absolutely needs-focused, because it absolutely makes no sense to try to house someone in just an age-appropriate place, and obviously we'd all crave that, I think. But if the care isn't there, the care has to be there. And the care can be complex and it can be changing. And so even in the unit that we have established, we struggle to give appropriate care at times. There's a bit of a problem too in that I think, and I don't want to bag the NDIS because I think it is a great advance, but there's a bit of a problem in the fact that, for example, our Huntington-specific allied health people, for example, are not actually the people doing the assessments. They can advise, but there are a lot of people who are assessing who may not just be the absolute experts. But I mean, we're trying to engage, and I think they do. And I think generally it's an advance, but you really have to be sure that the needs are met, not just age.
What are your recommendations then for people living with HD to live their best possible lives?
Well, we've changed in our directions really over all the years I've done this, and that is really what we should all do, which is maintain best brain and physical health, where we have quite good evidence that exercise makes a difference. Any disease that has any change in thinking, or what we call cognition, is best in many ways managed by continuing to think and concentrate and socialise. So the best advice is really stay healthy, and it's easy for me to say, but don't let the disease hijack your life, particularly if you're one of those people who know you've inherited the genetic change before it's developed. It can, of course, be very challenging to live with that knowledge if you decide to go ahead. So it's mainly what we all should be doing: less alcohol, non-smoking, exercising. One of the reasons I have to retire is to exercise and look after my brain health.
Let's talk about the next frontier then, and the future. Could we use gene silencing to manipulate the mutation and reduce the gene's effect?
Absolutely. And already there were 46 brave people who in the UK, British Columbia in Canada, and Germany who fronted up for the first gene silencing trials. And those people have been followed, and to date there doesn't seem to be any serious, at least short-term side effects. So that's for over 3 years now. And so based on that, a major study by Roche Pharmaceuticals as a partner has been underway of many more people and controls. This is delivered by lumbar puncture, but those results hopefully will be expected in about another year. As far as I'm aware, there's no major incident, and Westmead's fortunately been involved with some spaces in that trial that's now fully recruited.
And what about the ethics of genetic testing of embryos? People who use IVF, who can't conceive, same-sex couples and so on, will undergo routine genetic testing of embryos. As that becomes more routine and cheaper, does that usher in a better future or a sort of eugenic dystopia?
Well, exactly. And it's a really controversial area, actually, in my view. So there is this possibility of what's called pre-implantation diagnosis. This is definitely not my field. This is where the geneticists become involved and really do the counselling through this. And fortunately, one of our most dedicated early social workers joined the genetics service and then actually won a Churchill Fellowship to study this overseas and bring that knowledge back. So it is a very difficult area, and as we look towards a cure, you could say, well, would you really abort this person because that's one of the conditions of it, or not going ahead with that pregnancy? So to date, there is this technology to have a knowledge that this baby will not carry the genetic change. And I think most people would still go with that option.
What are your recommendations for Huntington's, New South Wales ACT?
Well, look, I think that the important thing, my view, is that they need a separate space that's separated out from the service, so that they need to have somewhere where they can go to as they're sole advocate group where they can complain about me, the service, advocate. It's been really useful over the years to have that separation where, particularly when we're making that move, but over the years where the association could come in as an apparently independent of my service that I'm obviously trying to develop, and maybe people could take a view that this was for my gain. So to have that power of advocacy slightly separated, we do have a lot of interaction, which is super important. But that's the first thing. And then I think really to have that space to keep up to date with developments, but to make sure that what you're interested in is really got some basis in science. I think the science side of it is super important. Of course, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's lots of people who still think probably you can cure Huntington's disease with a pill of some sort, and that's happened certainly. People travel overseas to get the cure and spend thousands of dollars, and of course it's not there. So to give the accurate information out, to be a conduit to us, but to not be totally linked, so direct people into the service. And then really to make international links. I think the international community in Huntington's disease has been a massively strong development where we both with the association but also with our service have colleagues all around the world. We're part of the research groups, and that's been a really important aspect of this actually.
You mentioned that you're going to have more time to exercise now that you'll be retired. What else are you looking forward to in retirement?
Well, I'm looking forward to actually catching up with people. I mean, it's very hard to try to get in touch with families and friends when you have a fairly busy life elsewhere. I've got wonderful grandchildren. I'm very blessed. I've got interest in a lot of things, but particularly the arts, and COVID, of course, is going to influence this. So I think I'd try to travel in remote Australia. My husband's a New Zealander, and there are wonderful areas of remote New Zealand. So that's what I'm hoping for.
My mum's a Kiwi, so I think they're a good bunch. They're a good bunch.
Absolutely.
Liz, I wish you all the best in retirement. Thank you for all of your work, and thanks for taking part in this.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.